For those of you gamers out there, do you remember the first video game you ever fell in love with? I do. For me, it was The Hobbit. Yeah, that one. Look, I know this game looks pretty ridiculous now, but for me at the time, this game was bomb. There were bad guys to fight, it took place in one of my favorite books, and it was just a ton of fun. Back then, I wasn't looking for life lessons in the games I played. No kid was. But now, being a little bit older, I've started to reflect on it a little more. About halfway through the game, there's this boss that we could never beat. We tried over and over again, but we just couldn't do it. I remember how every single time I fought that boss, it felt like it was so consequential, like it was really life or death. I remember how frustrating it was that I couldn't beat it. It felt so important to beat that boss, and at the same time it felt so impossible. Finally, we gave up and went to other games, or just kept playing the first few levels over and over again. Years later, my brothers and I remembered that old game, and decided to bust it out for another try. My brother beat the whole game easily in just a few hours. Later, I tried myself with the same result. Now that years had gone by, it was so weird to think that this game had been so impossible before. It almost seemed funny that it was such a big deal to me. I thought about that game all the time. I had dreams about it. I had my mom help me make a cardboard cutout of Bilbo's sword. I asked my grandma to draw pictures of Bilbo and Gollum so that I could color them and hang them on my wall. That game mattered so much to me then, and now it's no big deal, except for the nostalgia that it holds for me. But here's the thing, video games aren't the only things like this. Riding a bike, learning long division, playing soccer, unloading the dishwasher, making my first Pinewood Derby car. There are so many things from my life as a kid that seem so incredibly important, and yet so incredibly overwhelming. And yet many of these things are things that I can now do automatically, or that I even enjoy, although I'm gonna be honest, I still do not remember how to do long division. And this is just kind of how life goes. In fact, I think life has a lot of similarities to a video game. Every level, the stakes get a little bit higher. What felt like a big deal at level 4 is a laughing matter by the time you're at level 12. But after every level, there's a new challenge. There's something you haven't seen before. I know a lot of games nowadays don't have levels, but the basic formula often remains the same. The farther you get in the game, the more you have to improve and develop new skills to meet the challenges presented to you. The more you play, the higher the stakes get. But wait, do the stakes actually get higher? Certainly the game gets more challenging. You meet new enemies and new difficulties. But think about it. What is actually at stake in a video game? Most of the time, almost nothing. If you die, you go back to the last save point and you try again. Usually you don't lose anything at all, except for a little bit of time. You don't die for real. You don't lose any real money. It doesn't impact your real life at all. As a kid, dying in The Hobbit felt like the end of the world, but now as an adult, I know how little it actually mattered. Now I'm gonna try to make a point here, and I want you all to look at this with a little bit of intellectual maturity. Because the longer I live, the more I feel like real life is kind of like a video game in this sense as well. I mean, have you ever taken the time to really think about the things you worry about during the day? Most of the time we worry about things without actually realizing what's at stake. What would happen if your worst fear actually happened? Let's say that you're terrified of looking dumb in front of other people. Now let's imagine what would happen if you did something really embarrassing in front of all the people you were afraid of looking dumb in front of. If these people really are your friends, they'll get over it. Sure, maybe they'll laugh a little bit, but if they're your true friends, they won't stop being your friend. They won't harass you for the rest of your life about it, not if you ask them not to. If they're not your real friends, then honestly, maybe you're better off being rid of them anyway. Okay, but let's say your fear is running out of money. Okay, so you're out of money. Now what? You sell all your stuff, maybe you go bankrupt, but do you die? Probably not. You can find a job somewhere. You can live small for a while. If you have debt, you can start paying it off bit by bit. Your life will probably change in a very drastic way, but it will probably go on, and you can probably learn to be happy as well. So now let's say your fear is the big one, dying. Well, this will depend a little bit on what you believe about what happens after death. Most religions have a pretty optimistic outlook for what happens after you die if you've tried to be a good person. If you don't think you are a good person, then start today to become a good person. This is in your control. But maybe you aren't religious, or maybe you don't have any sort of belief about what happens after you die, or maybe you just don't know. Well, for starters, I don't think that there's any reason to assume that death is bad. If we really don't know anything about death, then it would make just as much sense to assume that death is the beginning of something good than it would be to assume that it's something bad. There's a great Epictetus quote that says, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. Thus death is nothing terrible, but the terror consists in our notion of death, that it is terrible." Death is only necessarily as terrifying as we make it. We have no reason to believe that death is inherently bad than we have to believe that it's inherently good. In the Tao Te Ching chapter 16, it says, "By knowing the constant, we can accept things as they are. By accepting things as they are, we become impartial. By being impartial, we become one with heaven. By being one with heaven, we become one with Tao. Being one with Tao, we are no longer concerned about losing our life, because we know the Tao is constant and we are one with Tao." From a Taoist perspective, the whole point of life is to become one with Tao. This is in our control. We can't always control whether we're rich or poor, liked or hated, or even whether we live or die. But we can choose to live lives of oneness and wholeness. We can choose to follow our intuitions, to try things that seem scary, to care for other people. Now, please don't listen to this and think that I'm telling you to go ride your bike on cliff edges or throw your life savings away gambling or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that by living our lives in harmony with Tao and doing our best to follow Tao, we can eventually become one with Tao. I am also saying that failure in pretty much everything else in life is much less consequential than we tend to make it. Thanks for watching. Peace and blessings.